The deal, Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff, a 2021 third round pick, a 22 first rounder, and a 23 first round pick. So the Rams, they give up a haul to get Matthew Stafford in this deal. And I don't think it's that much of an upgrade, honestly, for the Los Angeles Rams. Yeah, I know Stafford, he's got a better arm and stuff, but he's up there in age and he's had a lot of injuries over the last few seasons, was the career Lion. So Matthew Stafford, 12 years with the Lions he was with, and now he finally gets traded and he's going to Los Angeles in the offense of Sean McVay, and we'll see how McVay's going to use Matthew Stafford and if he could get the Rams over the hump after the last couple seasons they've struggled after making the Super Bowl with Jared Goff and losing to Tom Brady and the Patriots years ago. But Matthew Stafford now, he lands in LA. He's got some good weapons there. Robert Woods, obviously, Cooper Kupp. You got Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett, Cam Akers in the backfield. And now you got Stafford there. That's a pretty good offense. Jared Goff, he was okay this season, and he's going to Detroit. And as far as the fantasy football implications here, Matthew Stafford, the last few seasons, he's been okay. And a player usually drafted at the back end of drafts, anywhere from the 12th to the 15th round usually with Stafford. And his stats over the last few years, not bad. Last season in 2020, 4,084 yards, 26 touchdowns, 10 of those, 112 yards rushing on the ground, a 2-point conversion and a fumble loss. So he was a middle-of-the-pack quarterback with Stafford last season. He finished within the top 15 in fantasy points for quarterbacks. Maybe this year with Los Angeles, he'll bump up a little more. But Stafford, throughout his career, no matter what, he's had huge games, and then he's had games where he gets 7 or 8 fantasy points in the ball game. And I still think we're going to see the inconsistencies with Stafford. Even though he's in Los Angeles, I don't think it bumps up his fantasy value that much. Maybe owners now, since he went to Los Angeles, will take him in the 9th round instead of the 12th or 15th. Because this year, I remember in most of my drafts, Stafford, he dropped down and he was going late rounds, or he was a free agent on the waiver wire most of the season. So Matthew Stafford, it's a good move, but I think they gave up too much for him. In 2019, his stats weren't all that great either with Stafford. 2,499 yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 intos, 66 rushing yards, and 3 fumble losses. He was injured and missed about 6 or 7 games in 2019. So Stafford, the thing with him is health. But every year it just seems like he has something. This year he played through a number of injuries. He had a bad back. He had the broken thumb, I believe, on his throwing hand. But he's a warrior, no doubt about it. But I don't think this helps his fantasy value that much. And the Lions, I'm surprised they got a huge haul to get Jared Goff, 2 first rounders and a 3rd rounder in this deal. So it's a great move for Detroit, I think. Goff, he's still a pretty capable quarterback. He's inconsistent as well, but I don't think it's that huge of an upgrade, in my opinion, for Los Angeles to have Matthew Stafford over Jared Goff. And Goff last season, he was decent in fantasy, ranked number 27 overall on the year. He had a decent stat line. Him and Stafford, their stats were pretty much the same. Goff, 3,952 yards, 20 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 99 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, a 2-point conversion, and 4 fumble losses. So these guys, they were neck and neck pretty much, their stats. Only a few more interceptions Goff threw, but total touchdowns, Stafford, he only had 1 or 2 more. And Goff right now, his value might drop just a bit here for fantasy owners. But he was a player also, like Stafford, who didn't get drafted in some fantasy leagues, or he went anywhere from the 12th to the 15th round, but he had a couple good games this season. And I think with Detroit, he'll be okay. He's still under that big contract that Los Angeles gave him a few years ago. But the Rams, obviously, they were disappointed in Goff now the last few seasons because they didn't make it deep into the playoffs. Even though this year they did beat Seattle, but the Green Bay Packers in the 2nd round took them out easy. But then we saw last week Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beating them. But anyway, Jared Goff, I think he'll be decent over there in Detroit. He still has some decent weapons. You got DeAndre Swift. You got Kenny Galladay. We'll see if Marvin Jones comes back here for this ball team. And in 2019, Goff, he had a pretty good season as well. arguably better than last season, which I think it was. 4,600 yards, 3,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, 40 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 5 fumble losses. So Jared Goff, his stats pretty much seem better or just about the same as Stafford. And I think this year in LA, Stafford, he possibly could throw for 30 or more touchdowns. But I don't know how McVay's going to use him. Stafford, he's up there in age now. Like I said, 12 seasons in the NFL. And he's had a pretty good career. But as far as winning and getting his team deep into the playoffs, that's something Jared Goff has more experience with. And Matthew Stafford pretty much hasn't. I don't even think the Lions won a playoff game in Matthew Stafford's tenure as the quarterback. Yes, they made it a few times to the playoffs here, but I just don't think this is going to be a huge improvement for the Rams like they thought they would, and they traded a haul to get him, in my opinion. So Stafford, for fantasy purposes, he'll be a player, like I said. You'll probably draft him 10th round or later in some leagues, even though quarterback's obviously a deep roster position. And Jared Goff, the same type of thing as well. So a huge blockbuster trade we see go down here, which you don't really see in the NFL. They're few and far in between, but the last few seasons, they're starting to happen. Matthew Stafford traded from Detroit Lions to the Los Angeles Rams for Jared Goff and 3 draft picks, including 2 first-rounders. And we'll see what these guys do for their new teams and for fantasy football owners here in the 2021 season.